Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. Yes, I am in the middle of doing my hair, and usually I start videos at the beginning of when I do my hair because, you know, it's just kind of hanging out and stuff. Well, I tried to film this and it just didn't come across well, so I stopped it and then I'm restarting it. So yes, my hair is partially done. So grief is a interesting topic because everybody deals with it in their own way and, you know, their own style, and no person grieves the same way as the next. I truly believe that, you know, because nobody knows you better than you, and it's kind of like, you know, you want to talk about it or you want whatnot, but you don't know how other people are going to feel about it. And, you know, people could be dealing with their own stuff, and that's what I find in my life. You know, there's a lot of people dealing with a lot of stuff, or they don't know how to handle grief, so you don't want to talk about your grief because you know that they haven't fully grieved for their loved one or, you know, whoever they lost. And you don't want to, you know, you never want to tell somebody how to grieve, and that's not what I'm trying to say. It's just, you just don't know when the appropriate time is to talk about it, you know? It's like this awkward thing because if you're kind of dealing with the same loss as another person, again, they could be dealing with it completely different. So it's like, do we talk about it? Do we not talk about it? That type of thing. And whatnot. And, you know, there's some people in my life that haven't grieved for the loved ones yet. Not that they haven't grieved, it's just that it's a very sticky situation and you don't know how to go about it. For me, I'm an interesting griever. And again, I know everybody grieves differently, but for me personally, I think I grieve differently, and I know everybody grieves differently, but I grieve in a different way. I tend to just want to support my loved ones and be there for them, and, you know, eventually, yeah, I'll grieve and whatnot, and it'll be nice to lean on somebody and, you know, have somebody there to lean on. But there's certain types of grief that if, you know, a person doesn't want to understand or want to be a part of, then, you know, that's very hard to grieve in front of them. And what I mean is, so I had 2 miscarriages when I was young. I had one when I was 15, 16, and then one when I was 17. And I, you know, I had to grieve those losses alone. And, you know, today would have been the due date of my first child if they survived. And January 2nd is the due date of my second child that I lost. And these days are always very strange for me because, like, I know I never got to meet them, you know, they weren't planned or anything, like, especially at that age, my lord. I mean, some people do plan at that age, and, you know, props to them and stuff, but for me, I was in a very unhealthy situation, and to grieve those losses in the state that I was back then was very challenging. It was like mostly like I just had to pick myself up and move on and carry on and survive because I was dealing with many different things at that time. And, you know, it was very hard to talk to family members about that because you know, they didn't know, and to bring that up, you know, again, I was in a very sticky situation where, again, I don't blame anybody. You know, my actions and what I was saying was made out to be lies. So, and again, I was a very sketchy person back then. And side note, I hate it when people tell me that I'm too hard on myself back then and stuff. It pisses me off. I'm not too hard on myself. I'm just explaining what I was feeling back then and stuff, and I know some of my actions back then weren't right or appropriate, but again, who knows how to handle yourself in a situation like that. And yeah, maybe I am a little bit hard on myself, but it's just me trying to communicate what I was going through back then. Sorry. Carry on. So, if I did tell my loved ones about, the miscarriages, would I be believed, right? And I'm not blaming anybody. Again, a lot of my actions were sketchy back then, and some were inappropriate. So, okay, a lot inappropriate. So, it was I felt like it was my burden to carry type of thing. Again, I wasn't in the right state of mind back then, but, I have to be accountable for my actions. And, if some family members see this, they are going to be pissed off and say a lot of things. It's just really hard to... I wasn't in the right state of mind back then to express or explain my situation back then. And, they might get pissed off that I'm talking about it on here and whatnot. I have just moved on from all of that stuff. I haven't put it behind me and stuff. I mean, yes, it is behind me, but I am working through all that trauma and all that grief still. And, they might be dealing with this or hearing this in a very different way, kind of grieving in their own way, of grieving for the person I used to be, the person that I am, just things that they didn't see or understand. I totally understand that, but I am very aware of my actions. And, I want to reach out and help people. That has always been a passion for mine. I always want to support people and be there for people, because I do know how isolating situations can be. Again, not all situations are the same, but I am willing to learn and be there for the people. And, if certain people in my life don't respect those choices, it's not their life. So, but I also understand that hearing that a lot of this is overwhelming and kind of unbelievable, it's just, it's very hard to go back and see myself in those shoes and feel those things that I was feeling. And granted, if I know now what I know now from what I went through, and, if I had to redo it all over again, were there certain things that I would do differently? Perhaps, with the tools that I am well aware of now that are available. But again, nobody knows how to handle themselves in those situations. And yeah, I did go through a grievance of those 2 children that I lost, and the grief of losing myself. But I also, gained myself. I found myself in a way that I didn't know I could. I found my strength. And again, that's all part of grief, and people are going to deal with grief in the very different ways. And so yeah, will people be grieving, for me if they hear these situations? Yes, of course, they're going to be very sad and they're going to have questions. But again, it's very hard to explain to somebody hey, I was pretty messed up back then, I couldn't even put into words or form sentences that could explain what I was feeling back then. Now I have, the words and the ability to do that. Anyways, this is kind of going off topic, but anyways, moving on. So that was, I have lost loved ones throughout my life when I was young. And, again, I was young back then, so I didn't understand the whole meaning of grief and whatnot. And even though it was explained to me as a kid, you don't fully understand the loss of somebody. I mean, you do to the extent that you can understand, if you know what I'm saying, which isn't making a whole lot of sense, but, those different understandings of grief. And, I learned that as I went on, and I learned that, my grief shifted and how I handled grief shifted. And when we lost my aunt a few years ago, that was a big shock. It was really sudden. It happened quite fast. And, a lot of people were grieving her. And some people grieved in anger and said some things out of anger and frustration. And I totally understand that, because that is sometimes how people grieve, even though it is not nice things that were said. Some stuff was said to me that was very, very hard at the time to hear, but then again, I was pretty numb. But I've always had the understanding, like, people grieve differently. And still, it was shitty, and, I have never had a conversation with those people about it because they really didn't like me. Not to sound childish or anything, but that's just the fact, And, I know people tend to not want to talk about, shitty situations and stuff and how they handled it. That's fine. That's how some people are, and I'm not, pissed off about that at all. It just hurt. It sucked. But anyways, it's interesting to me to see how people grieve for a person differently. That you've known this person for so many years, and there's different stages that people were a part of her life with. I had her for 20 years in my life, and even though she wasn't there, for my mid-20s that I'm going through, and to see how much I have achieved and grown as a person, even though sometimes, it doesn't feel like it. But I'm also thankful for the time she got to spend with, my dad and my uncles and her close friends that were like sisters, and, my other cousins, and everybody got to experience her different. And was she perfect? No, I've said this in many videos that, nobody is perfect. And, I'm not ashamed to say that my aunt wasn't perfect. That yes, I do realize she made mistakes and she did actions that, weren't the best, but we were able to move forward. And yes, I know some people saw her in a different light than I do. And I respect those choices. And I respect the way that people were grieving for that. I mean, there's no handbook that tells you how you're supposed to grieve, because nobody knows you. And I'm sure there's guidelines out there, but who the hell follows those? Like, you can't just basically say, okay, it's 7 o'clock, I'm gonna cry now. Oh, it's 10 o'clock, okay, I'm gonna get up and, move past this. Like, no, there's no guidelines for it. And, am I always gonna miss my aunt? Of course. Am I gonna miss her when I have kids and walk down the aisle? 100%. And there are days where I still wish I could talk to her. I mean, I talk to her differently, but it's all about the different levels of grief. And I know people deal with death differently. Granted, somebody really close to me lost a really close family member. And, they're still not over it today. I mean, nobody's gonna be, over death or losing a loved one. I mean, it's always going to be a part of you, a lot of like what ifs, and I really wish that they could see this or be a part of my life. And again, this side is doing fuck all, but that's okay. And it's just, yes, it is sometimes frustrating when somebody gives you mixed signals, if you know what I mean, and they make you feel like a bag of shit of ways that, you wanted to do something for them special, but it was too close to that date, so they reacted differently out of anger and frustration and hate, and they took it out on you. And then a year from now, it's completely different. They want to have a gathering and whatnot close to that date and of their birthday, but it's really close to the date that they lost the loved one, and it's very confusing and frustrating. But sometimes you just have to kind of go with the flow, even though I'm kind of screaming and panicking inside because, like, I know how shitty last year went. and what a piece of shit I felt like. Again, that's not beating myself up, that's just how I felt, right? And then to see them like not okay with it, but like they're acting completely different this year, it's like, it's very like, you know, it feels like whiplash, and you have no idea how to act, because it's just like, well, they really didn't like the word birthday, and now they seem to be okay with it, and now I don't feel comfortable saying it because I know how they reacted last time I said it. So it's very like learning how to go through those waves of grief that are different for people, even though you might be screaming on the inside going, oh my god, I have no idea what to do, or am I doing it right? Like, again, there is no handbook of saying, you know, right and wrong ways to grieve. There's no right or wrong ways to grieve. And, you know, I tend to, I'm a person that respects people, right? You know, I respect their choices and their decisions and stuff, and I do my best to support them. So if the waves of grief are kind of coming off whiplashy, you know, then I have to respect it and kind of, you know, use my rowboat and try to like maneuver over those like waves, right? It's not easy, and sometimes it's frustrating, but also don't forget about your grief that you're going through. Just because somebody's grieving doesn't mean you're not allowed to grieve. And, you know, for a while there, I forgot about that. I forgot that I was allowed to grieve. I was allowed to feel sad and stuff. And, you know, then that kind of wave of grief hits you, and you kind of feel like a shitty person from forgetting to think about them, or forgetting that, you know, your grief. And that's okay, you know? Just because you didn't think about them that day doesn't mean they aren't with you. Doesn't mean you forgot about them, you know? Life does go on. And just don't be so hard on yourself when those waves of grief hit you. You know, don't be ashamed of them. Just because it happened 10 years ago, or 15, or 40, or 80, or 6 months ago, or 7 years ago, you know, it doesn't matter. You know, you're still allowed to grieve that person. You're still allowed to feel sad. And we all do our best to carry that grief and that sadness with us, and to, you know, pick ourselves up and move on. And yes, that kind of sounds very different, and I know how some people might take that, but yeah, life does move on after death, and it is sad because we do wish those people are with us. But in the end, it's like they want us to roll into a ball and stay there for all our lives, or they want us to live. And, you know, some days you do want to sit there and crawl into a ball and cry and miss those people, and that's okay. But just remember to continue on living, and that you're allowed to miss those people, and you're allowed to still love them, and you're allowed to still talk to them. I don't know, that's kind of like my spiel for today. It's a little dark and twisted, but I mean, welcome. Welcome to my channel. Anyways, guys, thanks again for tuning in, and I really appreciate all the love and support. Remember, never give up, always keep fighting. You are enough, and you are very, very much loved. Until the next video, guys, I love you.